Hello, welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets?
We have no regrets for this evening's meeting.
Council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Before I ask for a mover and seconder to resolve into Committee of the Whole, I'd like to give the floor to CAO Jane Closey to introduce our new commissioner. CAO Closey.
Mayor and members of council, I did want to take this opportunity at Neil Garby's first meeting of the Planning and Development Council to introduce Neil. Neil comes to us, as you know, with 30 years of experience at the municipal and regional level in the western municipalities of the province, as well as within the GTA, York, Aurora, and York Region, Aurora, and Richmond Hill. So we're very glad to have him here and start his work in terms of the Community Development Commission. At the same time, I actually would like to thank Jim Barry, who has been instrumental over a number of months holding the commission together and moving it forward. Certainly a big thank you to him for all of his work during this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CAO, and thank you, Mr. Barry. Council, would two of you like to move us into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Sanju and Councillor Knoll, thank you for being so quick on the draw. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the motion carries. And we are now in the relaxed rule setting of the Committee of the Whole. The first thing on our agenda is a pair of consent items. I wonder if I could have a motion for the consent items. Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Any objection to the consent items? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The consent items are carried. There were no confidential consent items. I'll just note for everybody's clarity. Our first item is the public hearing item for a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment by Cap Oak and Red Oak. And we have a report, everybody on council, as well as the public, I suppose, has had a chance to read the report from the Planning Services Department, and the senior planner, Lee Musson, is standing by to give a presentation for the viewers to summarize and recap what we're dealing with here. Following that, we'll have questions.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council. This evening, you can find my staff report on page 29 of your agenda. Cap Oak, Inc. and Red Oak, GA, Inc. submitted draft plan of subdivision and a zoning bylaw amendment applications to permit the development of 575 residential units, 2 village squares, a natural heritage system, stormwater management pond on approximately 40.6 hectares of land. The current applications were submitted and deemed complete on August 21st, 2020. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to introduce the application to council and the public and to obtain any further comments as related to this application. This report is to be received and no decisions on the application are to be made at this time. If there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we will connect you to the meeting. You will be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. Next slide, please. The properties are generally located on the east side of 8th Line and north of Dundas Street East and are outlined in red. The legal description is part of Lot 10, Concession 1, north of Dundas Street, and are municipally known as 1019 and 1059 Dundas Street East. The subject lands consist of 2 properties generally located between the Shield Bay subdivision to the west, which is built and occupied and consists of detached, semi-detached townhouse units, as well as apartment mixed-use buildings. And the Dundonald subdivision to the east, which is draft approved and consists of detached dwellings, townhouses at Dundas Urban Core Blocks, School Block, Village Square, and Stormwater Management Pond. The subject lands have approximately 300 meters of frontage on Dundas Street East. On the south side of Dundas Street are residential uses consisting of 2-story detached dwellings and townhouse units, as well as apartments and commercial uses further to the east. On the northeast corner of Dundas Street East and 8th Line is a site plan application proposing an 8-story residential apartment building and 3 holdout properties north of that site. To the north of the subject lands are vacant lands, which are designated as natural heritage system, and lands designated for future residential uses, but are not subject to a current development application at this time. The Cap Oak, Red Oak lands are generally flat and comprises of natural features and agricultural fields. The site is currently vacant. Next slide, please. The proposal relates to the redevelopment of approximately 40.6 hectares of land for 575 residential units, 2 village squares, blocks 204 and 205, 3 Dundas urban core blocks, 201 to 203, stormwater management pond, 206, and the natural heritage system, block 208. The breakdown of residential uses consists of 116 detached dwellings, 51 rear lane townhouse units, and 408 street townhouse units. Approximately 17.8 hectares of the 40.6 hectare property will be conveyed to the town as a natural heritage system, and a condition of approval would require this conveyance. This subdivision will assist in achieving a complete community in this location with the extension of roads and services between 8th Line and the Dundonald land. The proposed zoning would facilitate the development of the lands. Can I have the next slide, please? This slide is intended to illustrate where on-street parking is proposed, but it is rather difficult to see. The small rectangles on the streets are the proposed on-street parking locations. Based on a subdivision of 575 dwellings proposed, there are 671 parking spaces provided on the private properties. And based on this preliminary plan, there are 267 proposed on-street parking spaces, which will give a total of 938 spaces for the subdivision. There is no request at this time to deviate from the North Oakville zoning bylaw as it relates to the parking requirement. An issue has been identified as part of this report that would require the applicant to consider additional rear lane townhouse units along Street 8 to reduce the number of driveways and maximize additional on-street parking opportunities. Next slide, please. The North Oakville East and West secondary plans provide a planning framework for the lands north of Dundas and south of Highway 401 between 9th Line in the east and Tremaine Road in the west. The North Oakville East secondary plan designates the subject property as neighborhood area, Dundas urban core, natural heritage system, and avenue transit corridor. The North Oakville master plan is intended to assist in providing guidance and coordination of local roads and adjacent land uses for the North Oakville planning area. Development applications are reviewed to ensure general coordination and consistency with the intent of the master plan. However, minor modifications are permitted provided the general intent and direction of the master plan is maintained. The North Oakville master plan further identifies these lands as natural heritage system, general urban area, suburban area, neighborhood center area, stormwater management facility, activity node, village square, and Dundas urban core. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides were produced by planning staff to illustrate conceptually how the Dundas urban core blocks can be developed based on concept plans provided by the applicant. The black and gray building on the far left represents the site plan that is currently being reviewed on the abutting land holding for an 8-story residential building. Next slide. This slide is more of a bird's eye view. On the west duck block, the preliminary concept plan provided by the applicant anticipates 3 6-story residential buildings with approximately 1,500 square meters of retail space, which will be located on the building that's directly abutting Dundas Street, as well as 16 back-to-back townhouses. The easterly Dundas urban core block, the preliminary concept plan provided by the applicant, anticipates 3 6-story residential buildings, as well as 20 back-to-back townhouses. OPA 321, which was approved in 2019, allows the Dundas urban core blocks to be developed up to 12 stories. The Dundas Urban Core blocks are intended to allow the creation of a band of mixed-use development in high and medium densities along Dundas Street, and would include retail and service commercial development to be located at the intersections with North and South Streets. It is also anticipated that the highest density uses would be encouraged to locate at these intersections. Next slide, please. Subject lands are currently zoned existing development, ED, as illustrated on the left side of the screen. The existing development ED zone only allows those uses that were legally existing at the time of the parent bylaw came into effect. The proposed zoning for the site, as illustrated on the right side of the screen, proposes to rezone these lands from existing development to natural heritage system, park, stormwater management facility, and site-specific general urban, suburban, neighborhood area, center area, and Dundas Urban Core. The applicant's proposed zoning regulations can be found in Appendix A. Next slide. The applicant hosted a public information meeting on September 20th last year. 11 members of the public attended, as well as the ward councillors. Issues raised included construction timelines and access routes, the type of development, for example, residential and commercial, location of schools, concerns about high-density development north of Dundas Street, a decrease in property values, lack of trees and green space. Minutes from the meeting can be found at Appendix C within the staff report. 2 written submissions were also received and are attached as Appendix D. Notice of today's meeting was circulated to approximately 600 households, plus the residential associations. Next slide, please. This slide reflects the various matters identified by staff to date, and the future recommendation reports will address the following. Confirmation that the applicant is a member in good standing with the North Oakville East Developers Group, consistency with the provincial policy statement, conformity to the growth plan, regional official plan, and the North Oakville East secondary plan. An activity node is identified within the master plan to be located at the intersection of Street A and 8th line. The neighborhood center policies require a mixed-use, non-residential building to be located within the activity node. The west side of 8th line currently contains residential uses. The applicant is currently proposing residential uses on the northeast corner, which result in a non-residential or mixed-use building to be located at the southeast corner. Review of development opportunities to ensure that the Dundas Urban Core blocks contain sufficient retail and service commercial uses in conjunction with the highest density uses. In coordination of the draft plan of subdivision with the environmental impact study to the satisfaction of Conservation Halton, the region, and the town. Next slide. Conformity with urban design policies on matters such as built form, lot sizes, transitions, compatibility with adjacent properties, and interface with the public realm and vehicular access. Review of opportunities to provide on-street parking and investigate options to maximize visitor parking. And confirmation of appropriate road and lane widths to ensure functionality. Confirmation of the appropriate location of walkways. And consideration of the need for additional rear lane townhouse units along Street A to reduce the number of driveways and maximize additional on-street parking opportunities. Additional information is required regarding the number and type of units for the future development blocks 199 and 200. There is a small holdout property owned by the region along Dundas Street, which should be incorporated within the Dundas Urban Core block to ensure comprehensive development. Discussions with town planning and legal staff regarding the acquisition of town land along 8th line to be considered with the future development block 198. And confirmation from the region that the applicant has secured sufficient allocation to allow the full build-out of the subdivision, and any other additional items identified this evening by the public and council. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff put forth the following recommendation for council's consideration. Staff will be returning to council with a recommendation at a future planning and development meeting. However, no date has been determined. This concludes my presentation, and I am available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Musson. First questions are from Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation and the material that was provided to us. I do have a number of questions that I want to put forward, or issues that I want to put forward for consideration. I did email them to staff earlier, but I want to make sure that they're available to the public as well. The first is that Grindstone Trail doesn't continue fully through the subdivision, and I'd like to know if that's considered good planning. It reduces the grid pattern of the road network as per the master plan that was originally provided. The master plan also has 3 east-west corridors from 8th line, and this plan fails to achieve that, and I'd like to know if that's considered good planning. Number 3, the plan lacks a link between the neighborhood, the 2 neighborhoods between Street L and Street J towards the north end of it, which creates a disconnect between the 2 sets of crescents. And those streets were originally designed to be connected in the master plan to improve mobility. And I'd like to know if that's considered good planning, or if there should be some kind of connection between those 2 sets of streets. It was noted that the activity node fails to provide anything other than residential uses, and the non-residential uses need to be incorporated within that activity node. I'd like to know how that's going to occur, and is this application providing good planning for a complete walkable community? There's a 5th item that I want to ask staff about, and that is access points to Dundas. It looks to me like this plan removes 1 access point to Dundas that was within the master plan, and I'd like to know if that's because of too many access points too close together along Dundas Street.
Councillor Adams, thank you.
To the councillor, I mean, we'll take that those questions back, and we will include that within the recommendation report at a later date.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Longo is next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Lee, just a couple of quick questions or comments related to the issues. When it talks about the climate change emergency and looking at transportation, is there a way of also including building materials? I know the building code dictates that, but is there something you can work with the developer to see if they can take consideration of, minimizing greenhouse gas emissions through either the materials they use, the end, the R factor for insulation, things like that. So if you could add that. And the second one is related to a question. There is a large amount of the natural heritage system just north of this subdivision. Are there sufficient buffers to protect it from the development that's happening? And is it consistent to what has been done in the rest of the North Oakville development? So those are my 2 comments.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure Ms. Musson will include those. All right. Madam Clerk, are there, Councillor Haslett-Thiel?
Further to the questions on the natural heritage system, will we see as a council any trail plans that would go through the natural heritage system? We continue to see applications and the subdivisions, but the actual how the trail will be protected, the heritage system will be protected, and yet having trails for public use, I think is integral to the complete community given the size of and the density in those sites. So could we see something that's proposed? I'm sure there have been discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Madam Clerk, are there any delegations?
We have 1 listed delegation for this item. It's David Milano.
Council, the planner for Malone Given Parsons is here for questions, and I'm informed he has a presentation. And it looks like we're ready to receive that. Mr. Milano, are you there?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we hear you well. Are you?
Okay, sorry about that. I think I just got cut off.
All right, well, you have the Zoom or the floor, whatever we're calling it.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. My name is David Milano. I'm a planner at Malone Given Parsons, and on behalf of the applicant, I have a short presentation tonight on the noted development, and following the previous development, I will be cognizant not to double up on too many things for everyone. Here with me tonight are Trish Elliott and Katie Schofield from Great Gulf, as well as Joe McIntyre from Malone Given Parsons as well. So Red Oak G&A and Cap Oak Inc., as mentioned, own approximately 41 hectares of land on the north side of Dundas Street, just east of 8th Line. And Red Oak Cap Oak is a joint venture by Great Gulf and Arista Homes. They've submitted applications for draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment to propose. The proposal is to develop the lands with a mix of residential uses and public uses. Next slide, please. The lands are currently made up of agricultural fields and natural features. However, the area is transitioning to much more urban uses. As mentioned, the area to the west has been recently developed, and to the east, the Dundonald plan is draft approved for approximately 600 residential units. Next slide, please. So the proposed plan includes public uses such as 2 village squares, which is denoted by the VS on the graphic here, as well as a public trail located along the south edge of the natural heritage system. There's also a part of a stormwater management facility with a pedestrian walkway on the east side of the plan. The natural heritage system has been surveyed and staked and is consistent with the secondary plan. And as well, I'll point out that on the plan we've identified the 8th Line right-of-way, and to clarify that it is, while it's under the ownership of the town, which is why those lands are not included in this application, but just to note that based on the approved secondary plan, 8th Line will not extend through this right-of-way. I believe there was a question to that in the communications attached to the agenda. And in fact, the design of the plan would negate the opening of 8th Line any further north. As you can see, the proposed residential townhouse units that curve with the existing road. And so those lands within the unopened right-of-way to the north would be retained as part of the woodlot and trail. In terms of residential uses, the plan includes 610 units consisting of single detached homes and various townhomes. This includes all future residential lots and part lots. The plan's been designed to connect the uses with the draft approved plan to the east, as well as to be compatible with the existing neighborhood to the west. As well, it is designed so that the roads in the units are very similar to the approved Dun Oak plan to the east, and so that the streets and the residential uses would be cohesive and integrated into the community when built. And you'll notice that just generally the higher density units are situated to the southern half of the development, closer to Dundas Street East, with a gradation to some of the lower density units adjacent to the natural heritage system in the north. And lastly, the Dundas urban core blocks, which front onto Dundas Street, will be subject to future development applications. Excuse me, sorry, I just realized I can turn on my video. There we go. How's everyone doing? Okay, so next slide, please. So the proposed road network is generally consistent with the approved master plan, and it provides the overall connections to the larger transportation system. There were some modifications made to the road network, mainly in order to be consistent with the approved subdivision road network to the east, as well as to improve the pedestrian connectivity to the the Natural Heritage System, and to overall provide a better, more grid network in the southern portion of the development. And denoted on the larger figure in the dark red line is Street A, which will extend Wheat Boom Drive and accommodate local transit service, as well as a signed bike route. That road, Street A, connects to Trafalgar Road in the west and will connect to a future collector road in the east. Street B, which is the central north-south local road, will connect Street A to Dundas Street. Next slide, please. So the majority of the unit mix consists of street and laneway townhouses. There are also back-to-back townhouses and single detached homes proposed as well. Ultimately, the development conforms to the permitted densities for each land use type based on the approved secondary plan. The overall residential density is 51 units per net hectare, which would equal a population of about 1,700 people, excluding the future Dundas urban core blocks. Next slide, please. So as it was shown, a preliminary concept was prepared for the Dundas urban core blocks, which shows mid-rise density and a mixed-use building. The buildings are orientated to frame Dundas Street and Street V to create that urban form and bring transit supportive density to the corridor. There's also back-to-back townhouses proposed behind the apartments to transition that built form to the townhouses to the north. The concept was designed in conformity with the secondary plan, and it's also consistent with other Dundas urban core blocks along the corridor. And ultimately, again, the blocks will be determined through a future site plan application process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's 2 village squares proposed that are generally consistent with the approved secondary plan. One is located adjacent to the natural heritage system, and the second village square is located south of Street A and is central to the townhouse units. The proposed major trail, which traverses along the natural heritage system, connects to the existing and approved neighborhoods to the east and the west. The trail is accessible within the proposed community through that village square, as well as a pedestrian walkway at the north end of the development, which will allow pedestrian connectivity between those northern crescent streets. On the map here, a little bit hard to see, but it's that light purple short line in between the single detached lots at the top of the screen. There's also a pedestrian walkway located along the north side of the stormwater management pond, which would provide an additional pedestrian connection to the development to the east. Next slide, please. So the master plan, the North Oakville master plan also identifies the intersection of 8th Line and Street A as a neighborhood activity node, and the northeast corner of this intersection is within the plan. Neighborhood activity nodes are intended to serve as a central meeting place for residents and permits a range of medium density residential, mixed use, and limited commercial and civic uses. Both mixed use and single use buildings are permitted. The plan proposes medium density residential at the northeast corner of the node in a way that's compatible with the existing built neighborhood to the west. And the 2 photos shown here show the townhouses on that west side of 8th Line, west side of that intersection, which would be very similar to the proposed built form within the plan on the northeast corner. The plan also proposes a enhanced gateway to the major trail system just north of the intersection. This would involve using part of that unopened 8th Line right-of-way, and this feature would be intended to act as a trailhead and provide a physical and visual connection to the major trail system from that node. And the location of this, the central location of this gateway to the proposed and existing neighborhoods would be an accessible place and a short walking distance for most residents. It also has a clear sight line along 8th Line, and the connectivity between the communities would help really encourage that active use for pedestrians and cyclists. Next slide, please. And lastly, as mentioned, the applicant held a public information meeting in September 2020 for residents to attend and discuss some aspects of the development. And moving forward, agency and public comments, including comments from this meeting, are and will be reviewed and considered. And next slide, please. With that, I'll conclude. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to this tonight. And myself and I think a few others are on the line, and we'd be happy to answer any further questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Milano. Council, do you have questions for the gentleman? Thank you very much, Mr. Milano.
Thank you.
I think now I'll call on our planning director to summarize the additional issues identified for the report. Mr. Simeoni?
Thank you, Mayor Britton. Members of council, I did have a little bit of audio problems, so I missed Councillor Adams' second point and his third point, so I apologize for that, and both Councillor Longo's points. What I have for you now is, first item is Grindstone Trail does not continue through the subdivision. Staff are to confirm that this is an appropriate output. Plan lacks a link between streets L and J, creating disconnect between streets. Should there be a connection between these streets? Staff to investigate. This is the third one I was unable to pick up, Councillor Adams. Number 4, this plan removes one access point from Dundas that was shown in the master plan. Staff to provide rationale for this removal. Both Councillor Longo's points I was not able to get. And The trail plan will be developed, staff are to provide a trail plan that will be developed in the NHS and how the NHS be protected. So if I could have Councillor Adams repeat under item 2 and item 3, and then Councillor Longo.
Councillor
Okay,
Adams.
thank you very much for the
Council-
summary. So in addition to all of staff's issues that are to be reviewed, you've caught 3 of mine. The other 2 were that the master plan has 3 east-west corridors from 8th line that go all the way through the subdivision. This one only achieves 2, I believe. And I'd like to know if that's appropriate planning or whether a third east-west corridor should be provided.
Yep.
The 4th one that you missed, it was the activity node that fails to provide anything other than residential uses. And I'd like to have staff review that. As I understand that non-residential uses need to be incorporated within the activity node. I'd like to know how that's going to occur and whether this
Councillor,
application
we're
provides
having
good
a
planning.
technical audio problem, making it impossible for us to hear you. And it just went away.
Are we better?
Councillor Adams, would you mute and then unmute, please?
Yes.
I don't believe, I know nobody here heard a thing you said because of the very loud feedback. So would you be so kind as to start over?
Yes, sir. I will start over.
Thank you very
The
much.
2, so in addition to staff's items that are in the report, as well as the items that our planning director did catch, I believe the missing items were that the, sorry, back to my notes here, that the master plan has 3 east-west corridors starting from 8th line that go across the application's design. And this plan doesn't achieve that. I believe it really only has 2. And I want to know if that's good planning or if a third corridor ought to be incorporated. The other item that was missed in the planning director's material was the activity node that fails to provide anything other than the residential uses. The non-residential uses need to be incorporated within that activity node. I'd like to know how that's going to occur and if this application is providing good planning for it to be a walkable and complete community.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Longo, you asked about climate change and the size of the buffers for the NHS. Would you like to amplify that for the planning director?
Sure. Related to the climate change, Mark, is the building materials, and I know they're subject to the building code, but are there any building materials that help with minimizing greenhouse gas emissions, increased insulation, R values, those types of things? So that was related to the climate change. And then the other part was related to buffers. And I noticed as the presentation happened from Mr. Milano was one of the village squares is actually seems to go into the NHS, and just have a question about that as well, to see if it's taking away from the NHS by creating that village square, which looks like it's in it. So those are my 2 questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Simeoni?
Yes, Mayor Burton, I was able to capture all of those. You want me to read them back?
No, I think we all trust you on that.
Thank you.
We've had them 3 or 4 times now with varying degrees of audio interference. Council, can I have a motion for the report? Councillor Adams, thank you. Madam Clerk, I'm looking to see if there's any objection to the motion to receive the report. Seeing none, the report is received. Thank you, everybody. We can turn to item number 4 now. Item number 4 is the public meeting report for the zoning bylaw amendment for the Halton District School Board for the property at 1039 Dundas Street West. We have a presentation from our planner, Brandon Hassan, and I believe we also have delegations. And if there's anyone watching who would also like to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095, and we'll connect you to the meeting, and you'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. We have 3 registered delegations, just for council's information. Mr. Hassan, you have the Zoom or the floor, and we're looking forward to your presentation summarizing the matter for the benefit of the public.
Good evening. Hopefully you can hear me. No audio problems yet.
You are fine and good.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council, and members of the public tuning into tonight's meeting. This presentation is in relation to item 4 on tonight's agenda. A zoning bylaw amendment application has been submitted by Strategy 4 on behalf of the Halton District School Board. The proposal relates to a proposed new secondary school located at 1039 Dundas Street West. The report in Appendix A can be found under item 4 on pages 73 through 86 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to introduce the application to council and the public and obtain any further comments for review as related to this application. No decisions will be made at this time. And as noted on the screen, if there's anyone watching this live stream meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we will connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. And next slide, please. So this air photo map just shows a general outline of the subject lands, which are located on the north side of Dundas Street West, west of Nayagala Boulevard, and east of 16 Mile Creek. These lands include a vacant portion of town land associated with the 16 Mile Sports Complex. The property contains an existing church, parish hall, and service building, which will remain on the east side of the subject lands. And I've highlighted all of those items on the air photo itself. Next slide, please. So as submitted, this is a conceptual site plan submitted by the applicant. So again, the applicant is proposing a new secondary school with an associated sports field and running track for the proposed high school on the northern portion of the subject lands. These lands would be acquired by the Halton District School Board through a typical purchase and sale from the town, which currently forms part of the 16 Mile Sports Complex. In order to facilitate this, the applicant requires a zoning bylaw amendment to advance their proposal. Next slide, please. So further to the aerial photo that I previously showed, this is a high level look at the vehicular movement and circulation as shown on the screen. So what I tried to do is indicate that the southbound vehicles will be shown in the red arrows coming from the north. The northbound vehicles coming from the south are shown in the orange arrow. The westbound vehicles coming from the east are shown in the yellow arrows. And then the purple arrows show the eastbound vehicles coming from the west. And further to that, you can see at the northwest portion of the intersection, there's a future bus stop. Further to the west of that, there will be a right out only onto Dundas from the subject lands. To the north of that, there is a cul-de-sac, which will provide a full move primary access to the school site through the extension of 16 Mile Drive. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a map of the Oakville official plan for the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. And as you can see, there's a secondary school site symbol, which I will get to in a moment. The subject lands are designated Dundas Urban Core and Community Park Area, which permits secondary schools and accessory uses. The subject lands also have a secondary school site notation which straddles 1039 Dundas Street West and 3056 Nayagala Boulevard. This symbol is subject to a town-initiated official plan amendment, which will be discussed during item 5 on tonight's agenda, which would shift its location to the west of the subject lands, generally in the location of the proposed secondary school. This would remove any intent that the two corner properties would be required to develop a school as well. Next slide, please. So this slide and map shows the existing zoning of the property for zoning bylaw 2009-189. In terms of the existing zone, the lands are currently zoned existing development and park. The portion of the lands subject to the park zone form part of the 16 Mile Sports Complex, as previously noted under the town ownership. Rezoning the town lands would facilitate the integration of a sports field, which would be accessory to the school. Examples of this exist throughout the town as a synergy of compatible and related land uses, such as the River Oaks Arena and Holy Trinity High School, as well as the Glen Abbey Arena and Abbey Park High School. In terms of the proposed amendment, the applicant is proposing to rezone the subject lands from existing development and park to institutional special provision. This will facilitate a future site plan application to develop a high school for the Halton District School Board on the west side of the property. And in terms of the parent provisions, special provisions are being proposed as noted on the bottom portion of the screen. in terms of a minimum floor space index of 0.15. And this means the floor area of all buildings on a lot divided by the lot area, and the minimum front yard of 33 meters, whereas 6 meters is required. Next slide, please. So a public information meeting was held on December 14th, 2020 of last year. Since the writing of the staff report, public comments have been received and are noted below. The town initiated official plan amendment, which we will discuss later this evening, development timing, future notices, joint access, parking, servicing, and refinements to the zoning bylaw to regulate the lands to be retained by the church on the east side of the property. Staff have identified similar concerns and have highlighted them in the matters to be addressed. Next slide, please. So the font on this slide is a little bit small, but what I tried to do in terms of highlighting the matters to be addressed was bold some of the items in each line. So consistency with the applicable provincial documents, conforming to the regional of Halton official plan, conforming to the Oakville official plan and North Oakville East secondary plan policies, evaluation of the appropriateness for the proposed rezoning, evaluation of the easterly portion of the subject lands that currently contains the St. Peter and Paul Serbian Orthodox Parish, evaluation of the appropriateness of the proposed development from a technical and functional perspective in terms of items that would be reviewed through the site plan process, the town-initiated official plan amendment application, again, which we will discuss after this item, evaluation of the extension of 16 Mile Drive and the Westerly cul-de-sac to facilitate vehicular access and movement to the subject site, and evaluation of the town parklands to be acquired by the applicant. Review of the application will continue through the application review process. And next slide, please. Inclusion, Mayor Burton, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration. The additional comments received tonight will form part of the public record. Staff will be returning to council with a recommendation at a future planning and development council meeting. Thank you. Next slide. And again, if there is anyone watching this live stream of the meeting at oakville.ca and you wish to speak, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan. We have hands from councillors, but council, I would like to suggest that we hear the other delegations before we hear yours, because that may give the public a chance to raise an issue you might otherwise raise on their behalf. What do you say? Any objection to that? Wait, I've lost my view of you. You're back. I see no objection, Madam Councillor. So would you call the delegations?
Our first listed delegation is Natalie Hickman from Strategy 4 Inc. and Fred Thibault from the Halton District School Board.
Ms. Hickey and Mr. Thibault, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Hello, good evening, Mayor Burton, councillors, and town staff. My name is Natalie Hickman. I'm a planner from Strategy 4, and we are the consulting firm acting as the applicant on behalf of the Halton District School Board for this file. So I'd like to run through a few points in addition to those shared by Mr. Hassan to highlight the high-level areas of this file. So the 2019, next slide, please. Thank you. The 2019-2020 HDSB long-term accommodation plan identifies the need to open the Oakville Northeast High School by the year 2023-2024 in order to address enrollment pressures. And as of October 2020, there are 734 secondary students that live in Oakville north of Dundas, but attend schools south of Dundas Street. In July 2020, the Ministry of Education approved funding for this new secondary school, and as such, the board continues to advance this project to meet the targeting opening date. The proposed secondary school is to be at 1039 Dundas Street, approximately 250 meters west of Dundas and Nayagawa. And the southern portion of the site is the current location of the St. Peter and Paul Serbian Orthodox Church. The northern portion is owned by the town, as identified in the presentation earlier, part of the 16-mile sports complex lands. Next slide, please. In terms of planning policy, the North Oakville East Secondary Plan and the Livable Oakville Plan designate a secondary school at this location. The secondary school here will also ultimately allow the HDSB to fulfill one of the key intentions of the secondary plan, which is to create a campus of community activities in the North Park Master Plan area. Next slide, please. The purpose of the current application is to rezone the property from the park zone in the existing development zone to an institutional special provision zone to allow the secondary school, the associated parking, and the sports field. The special provisions, as noted earlier by Mr. Hassan, include a greater front yard depth and a lesser minimum FSI. Next slide, please. The key elements of the proposed school site, which are also to be refined through the future site plan process, they are to include a 3-story school building with 60 classrooms, and these classrooms will accommodate approximately 1,200 students. We have protected for possible future portable classrooms as well, and the sports field and running track at the north portion of the site. There are 141 parking spaces proposed, and this ratio works out to 1.95 spaces per classroom, which is within the zoning bylaw prescribed ratio of a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 3 spaces per classroom. The vehicular access will be provided with a right-in, right-out driveway on Dundas, as well as an all-moves driveway at the extended portion of the 16-mile drive. A bus lay-by is proposed on the east side of the building, and car lay-bys are on the east and the south sides of the building to allow for adequate bus and parent drop-off and pick-up. The HDSB will also be constructing a multi-use path along Dundas Street West to help facilitate pedestrian and cyclist access and to encourage active transportation to and from school by students and staff. Finally, the bicycle parking for students, staff, and visitors will be provided over and above the requirement from the zoning bylaw, generally located on the southeast corner of the school building in close proximity to the main entrance. A total of 46 bicycle spaces have been shown on this concept plan. Next slide, please. The servicing for the school site will be provided through sanitary and water services extended from Nayagawa along 16-mile drive. And that's what you see in the center of the image there. Stormwater management will be implemented through a series of low-impact dry retention swales that will drain to the existing ditch on the north side of Dundas Street. And we would like to note that the development of this school block will not preclude the redevelopment of any of the surrounding properties, and that a detailed servicing plan and stormwater management report will be presented at the site plan approval stage. This concludes our presentation of the proposed secondary school. I'd like to thank Mayor Burton and members of council and town staff for the opportunity to speak, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions you may have.
Thank you very much. There is a question or two. I'll start with Councillor Longo, who I saw first, and then I'll go to Councillor Pavan Parmer, Councillor Jasvinder Sanju, and then Councillor Elgar.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Natalie and Brandon, just as the Halton District School Board has been a key member of the Oakville Energy Task Force, the question I'm going to have in the issue is just about climate change and what the building of the school will be doing from energy efficiency, building materials, related to helping with climate change and minimizing greenhouse gases. So I just wanted to put that on the issues list of consideration as being part of that, because I think it's a really good opportunity to try and use much more energy efficient building materials, et cetera. So if I can just put that on the issues list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. Councillor Parmer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for your presentation. I do have a couple of questions, and they're related to parking and bicycle spots. So I note that in your presentation, you said that 46 bicycle spots is above the required amount in the zoning bylaw. And I just, it seems a little bit small to me, as a small number, considering that there will be 1,200 students, and it is going to be in a very heavily residential area. So I wonder if, any analysis is taken based on other high schools, and seeing how many students are biking to school, and if any of those considerations were put into coming up with the number 46. And then I also wanted to know if you could share with us what the minimum required spots were. Similarly, the parking spots. We had, quite the issue, and I can give you an example for Udinawi Public School where, again, we went with the zoning bylaw, put the number of parking spots that were required, but then the school started to become overcrowded. All of a sudden, we're at over 1,000 students, and as a result, we have to hire more teachers. The school board has to hire more teachers, and now there's not enough parking, and people are parking on the streets, and really the effect of it is put on our residential neighborhoods and our communities, and that's since been rectified because a second school opened up in Ward 7, so it relieves some of the pressure there. So I'm just, again, bringing this to your attention in terms of planning, and if you're considering what your projections may be in the future, and if at some point this high school too is going to be overcrowded, and we may need to plan for more parking now because, of course, students will be driving to school as well.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, Ms. Hickey, and thank you, Mr. Hassan, for your comments and information. It may have already been in the report, but I was hoping one of you could tell us what the target open date would be for the secondary school.
Through your worship, right now the target is September 2024, and that's assuming that we obtain all the necessary approval. So that's both at a municipal, regional, as well as a Ministry of Education level. So albeit we have the funding in place for the school, there are a few other approvals that need to take place as part of the architectural selection process, afterwards the tendering process, to make sure that the school as proposed and as designed is within the construction benchmark. So if we hit all those targets and things move along, at a good pace, there is a good chance that we can open by September 2024. Usually we say it's about 2.5 to 3 years to design and construct a secondary school of this size. So, as long as things move along quickly, I think we can hit that target.
Thank you, Mr. Heath. That's very helpful. Could I also just ask, or maybe this is a comment just for staff, when we were in attendance at the short HTSB public meeting, it was beneficial in that they indicated what the school board was going to be asking for in the bylaw amendment application. And I think Ms. Hickey actually alluded to this today as well. I think what I'd like to know from staff is whether we have made any changes or recommendations in the application itself, given what planning staff's knowledge is of the site. Like, do we at Town Hall, to staff at Town Hall, make any amendments or changes or recommendations after what the HTSB comes to us with?
Through your worship, to this point in time, after this meeting, staff were going to supply the applicant with a consolidated comments report that would identify all the issues and matters to be addressed, not only from the public and council, but from the internal staff reviewing agencies, such as park staff, transportation engineering staff regarding to stormwater management. So all those items would be put forth as one consolidated set.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. And I think another question for you as well. And Councillor Palmer actually alluded to this just a few moments ago, but we've had some very significant learnings from the other Ward 7 schools that we've had in North Oakville. Considering the fact that this is a walk-to community, this heavy traffic area, and also kind of layering onto that the fact that staff that is attending the school and providing services to the school may not be from Ward 7. I don't think that our parking index is the proper indication for how many parking spots there should be at the school. It's not just students and parents that are going to be parking, it's going to be staff themselves. And I want to make sure that that's taken into account, because staff may not be from Ward 7 or locally from Oakville. We want to make sure that there's enough parking available for them. And then the last question that I have for you, Mr. Hassan, is I think we kind of danced around it a little bit, but I believe there's a holding provision in one of the properties surrounding the area. Can you speak a little bit to that and whether that will be removed shortly soon or if it already has?
Yeah, through your Mayor Burton, in regards to the parking, absolutely. Not only do staff and facilities personnel require those parking spaces, but after grade 11 and 12 students require those parking spaces as well. So if I look at the site stats, under the zoning bylaw currently, 72 spaces are required and 141 spaces are being proposed. So we can certainly look at more ways of integrating parking. So they are exceeding what is required. And then in terms of bike parking, I believe that was another question that was asked. It's 7% of the total required vehicular parking spaces. So that would only equate to 5 bicycle parking. But at this time, the applicant is proposing 46. So again, we can take that back and determine where and which areas can accommodate more bicycle parking. And unfortunately, I didn't catch that last question about is a holding on the property?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hassan. So there's an H provision on the local property surrounding the area, and I was wondering if that was going to be removed or if it already has been.
I'm not familiar about the hold in particular surrounding this property. The surrounding properties are zoned existing development, so only the existing land uses would be permitted at this time. But if there's a specific property, I can look into it and get back to you.
Could you please, I think it would be beneficial to not only myself, but many of the other councillors, just so we know what's going on with the surrounding properties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Sanju. Councillor Elgar, then Councillor Chisholm, then Councillor Grant. And
thank you. Through
anyone else who may raise his hand.
I thought I heard Natalie say it would be open during the school year 2023-2024. So then I thought I heard September 2024. So which is the proper date that is scheduled now to open?
Through your worship, apologies, maybe a little bit misleading. So as part of the board's long-term accommodation plan, which sets out the board's 10-year forecast of what its required assets are going to be initially, when it was first drafted, we were looking at 23. But given the delays that we received with regards to ministry approvals and fundings and things like that, we had to push that out by another year. It's just going back again to the sensitivity level of, if we have any delays, it often results in a year pushback. So that's the difference. Is one was what was in our official accommodation plan document, and the new date, tentative date, is more aligned with what we anticipate the construction timelines are going to be if we proceed with the site.
Natalie also showed a slide about the sewage system. And is that, just curious, back to that slide, is that a gravity fed or is it a pump uphill to get there?
Thank you, through your worship. There's a series of gravity and pump. There's the full functional servicing report will be provided at the site plan, but the details of the servicing are provided through the application document. I'll apologize that I'm not as familiar with the civil engineering details of the file, but the details have been provided to staff, and we're anticipating that we'll be able to satisfy any comments that come through the staff's review of the file.
So, Natalie, I heard you say that this sewer would accommodate any development around the area, like to the east. Is that correct? Like when it's built?
Through your worship, the sewer and the sanitary provisions that we will be building will accommodate the school only, but it won't preclude the development of the surrounding properties. So the capacity of all of the services that the school board would be building to accommodate the school would not be accommodating the development, since there's no active developments on the adjacent properties. But there is nothing in the servicing scheme that will prevent the future development of the adjacent properties. I hope that answers your question.
So you mean you might have to run another pipe? Like when you do your sewer design, is it going to be just for the size of the school?
Through your worship, maybe just a point of clarification on that one. We're protecting for the capacity. So what we're getting at is that we're not extending services into the adjacent owners to the east of us. They'll, the way that we're designing, I believe the capacity along the 16-mile drive extension as a municipal right of way would be to provide enough capacity to protect for that development.
Oh, so sorry, you said you protect for enough capacity to protect for that development? Okay, that's what I need to hear. Now, would that be a pump or is that a gravity with your design?
I don't have the specifics in front of me, unfortunately, with regards to that. But as Natalie Hickman had pointed out, that will certainly be part of the FSR.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thanks. Can come back with.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate that. I'm done.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Natalie, just a couple quick questions on your presentation. Thank you very much for the presentation. The anticipation already in putting portables in on this site, I'm a little concerned about that. If there's an anticipation or a thought process that this school is going to be more than 1,200, why would we consider in the footprint of expanding this building to meet those requirements? Having portables, and I'm looking at the map, I don't know even where these portables are going. Where would they be located? Is it between the track and the school?
Through your worship, there's the Section 41 of the Planning Act requires any sites after a certain date to protect for portables in the future at the time of approval, regardless of the timing that they will be built. So the showing the portables on the site now just allows for the school board to build them in the future if they will need it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the school board anticipates them at the time of building the school or within a certain time horizon. And I believe your second question was regarding the location. They are between the school board, the school building and the field. So just north of the school building, which puts them out of the view of Dundas Street, as well as out of the view of Nayagawa.
Thanks, Dan. That's good to know. I wasn't aware that that had to be part of the Planning Act with respect to portables. So the portables, how many portables are you looking at? I think I looked at it quickly. Is it 4 portables?
Through your worship, right now the plan protects for, pulling up my plan here, 12 portables.
Oh, 12 portables. Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, that's interesting. And there's enough site to put in 12 portables between the track and the school?
There is, yes.
Okay. And the only caution I would have here is if having any discussions with 16 complex there with our parking at the north end, is there any concerns that have been raised or we should be looking at if there's overflow parking, it doesn't go into the complex, the north parking lot? Has that been discussed or with staff?
Through your worship, that's something that we can review as part of it. A lot of the existing schools that we have south of Dundas, if I understand correctly, there are quite a number of reciprocal agreements we have between the town as well as the school board, and this is something that we do quite a bit throughout the region. And essentially, what it is understanding that some town facilities and board facilities have different peak times. There's an opportunity for sharing and requiring less parking structure to be built up front. So there is potentially an opportunity for sharing. So to your point, I don't think we'd be looking to essentially preclude any kind of shared parking. We would certainly like to explore more of that. And it goes both ways too, where the town may also want to explore sharing some of our parking as capacity may increase at the sports center.
So that would suffice to say it would be a process of negotiation with staff with respect to that with the parking. Now, looking at the plans quickly, there's no roadway connecting up those 2 parking areas on the school site and to the town's parking. There's no roadway there. I looked, I don't see one, so we're fine with that. They're totally separate. Those parking spaces between the town and the school. Is that correct?
It'd be separate driveways, yes.
Okay, thank you.
If I may too, with regards to the portable, just a quick piece on that, through your worship, the board does always want to protect for portables in addition to the requirements, as Natalie had pointed out. The other is to protect for peak enrollment. And to answer your question as well with regards to why aren't we building to this size, a lot of it is we don't want to build to the peak because after that 10-year spike, we start looking at empty classroom spaces, which presents its own set of issues, which just leads to further problems down the road where we're either having to close space, mothball space, or not use it, which becomes far less efficient. So portables are really that tool that we use to manage peak growths, so that when we go back to a more sustainable population, we're within bricks and mortar and we're not having a significant amount of empty spaces. And further to that too, the ministry also looks at that when funding space, so that if we're always building the peak, they won't fund it. So they'll bring us back down to what the sustainable number of students is going to be over that building life cycle.
So Frederick, have we mothballed any school classrooms in Halton Region or even in Oakville?
Yes, we've had, I know at the public board, there's been a few closures that occurred. I know at the Catholic board, there's been a few closures that occurred when I was at my time there. So yes, there are spaces that become empty over time, and buildings become less utilized in certain areas of the city as we go past that peak. So it's happened in, neighborhoods ranging from, 10, 15 to 40 years old. So
yes, I'm aware we've closed schools down, but I'm saying classrooms. Do we mothball classrooms in active schools?
Yeah, we don't use them, so we close the room. So we're not, that's not an extra space that we're having to maintain and operate. So it's just shut down. So that's a process we do as a cost savings measure.
Thank you. I digress.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Grant is next, and I also have Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Knoll, and a return performance by Councillor Palmer and Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel. Councillor Knoll, I said your name.
Thank you. I just want to continue on something that Councillor Sandu touched on, and that is that the McGowan property that we look at and are concerned about, because this is a family that had a property that they have sat on for a long time and were unable to sell because of the whole school property issue. I'd like to know that once we get this going forward, they are now free and clear to at least use their property as they wish.
Yeah, through your worship, as I noted during my presentation, that will be discussed under item 5 tonight.
Okay. So we're not quite done with them. Even though they have the sword of Damocles hanging over them for so long, we still have to, okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Grant, Councillor O'Meara, and Councillor Robertson, I do have you on the list as well.
Thank you, Worship. Just wondering about the field. Are there plans to make it a floodlit field?
Through your worship, are you referring to a field with lights, just to clarify?
Yes.
Thank you. Through your worship, at this time, the field is proposed to be a natural field, but the HDSB is considering a future artificial field. It's not been determined yet at this time, but the potential lighting of a field would be described through the site plan process. Is there anything to add, Fred?
Oh, thank you for that. And just if staff might take that under consideration and as we move forward in terms of working with us to meet the town's needs as well in terms of floodlit fields as well, that might be an opportunity there. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. We're coming now to Councillor Robertson. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. A couple things. Is there going to be busing for the school, or do we anticipate that all students coming to it will be in that catchment?
Through your worship, with regards to transportation, again, we haven't gone through the official boundary review process, which will be used to define what those boundaries are going to be. But what I can say is that this area, or at least the school, is to serve the North Oakville community. So again, with the caveat of whatever the final boundary is going to be to serve the school, what we'll use is a 3.2 walk distance to determine transportation eligibility. So much like all our other schools in the area, anybody that falls within that 3.2 kilometers walking distance will be a Walk 2 school, and everybody beyond the 3.2 will be bust. So I hope that answers your question.
I understand that part. I'm looking at your in outs and especially coming from Dundas. Are we anticipating, Brandon, from the town point in terms of planning that there will be left turns out onto Dundas?
Through your Mayor Burton, although it's depicted on that plan, discussions with transportation and regional staff note that only a right out of the site would be permitted onto Dundas Street.
Okay, that's good. Because of busing, I was wondering about that mostly, and if they were having busing. My other one, it goes back to Councillor Longo and the request for as much environmental scope into this as we can, and consideration for a green roof if you could, just as another way of helping with the environment and mitigating some of the gas factors that up in the north part along Dundas. So that would be just my pieces of it.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. We now turn to Councillor Knoll, and then Councillor Haslet-Thiel, and then Councillor Palmer. And I think that's everybody.
Thank you, Worship. First of all, I'm going to apologize if this question I'm about to ask was answered. I'm having serious internet problems, so I've had some dropout of audio as this presentation has gone on, so I apologize in advance. My first question is with respect to the parking issue that I know has been raised by a few. What is the typical, notwithstanding what the bylaw requirements are, what is the typical student parking yield at a school of this size? What would you expect compared to, if you look at the other schools in a similar demographic area such as North Oakville, like White Oaks or Iroquois?
Your Worship, and Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong, but there may be some of those counts that are part of the traffic report if we did a parking justification study as part of it. From my own experience, from what I've seen in the high school, because you only have technically one grade, being grade 12, that really you have a potential population that may be utilizing cars. And what we've seen is that, albeit there is a demand for it, it's not as high as you would think. So the parking ratio that we're looking at now, if I were to compare it to other high growth areas, such as Milton, that comes to mind, where there's very large schools, what we've seen is around the 2 mark when it comes to that, and those are for significantly larger schools than this one. So I would say that it's something that's definitely in consideration, but we don't see that high of a parking amount because that grade 12 cohort is just a portion of the school that they're aged at the appropriate age for obtaining a license. So if you look at a 1,200 people place school, if you do the quick math on it, you're looking at about 300 potential kids that may drive, and of those, a lot of them are being bused and may not have a car of their own. So it diminishes the amount of potential drivers that are coming into a school site. So Natalie, if you had anything to add with regards to the TIS.
No, you've covered it. Thanks.
So you may have already answered the question, my next question. There's no adult school component to this particular build, such as the former Thomas Merton or the adult school Gary Wolfe at White Oaks. So it'll be strictly traditional day students. Okay.
That through your worship, that's correct. For now, it's a secondary school.
Okay. In terms of, I know some schools have a childcare component. For example, Iroquois has a daycare center. Will this school have any kind of facility like that?
Through your worship, as part of the capital priorities plan that we were approved for from the ministry, this is strictly a secondary school, so your standard 9 to 12 for now.
Okay. Those are my questions, Your Worship. I just want to make a quick comment, though, that I'm so happy to see this. I mean, this has been such a long time to get to this point. I mean, I've been here for 20 years, and I think of the 20 years, about 19.5 of them we've been anticipating the school. So I'm so pleased to see that this is finally coming to fruition. It's a proud day indeed to see this come before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Haslet-Thiel.
Thank you for the presentations tonight. The number 1,200 has been used several times. Is that number 1,200 inclusive of portables?
Your worship, it is not. That is the build capacity of the facility.
Okay, so Mr. Hassan, can you just advise from a site plan perspective, do we use what the property can be built to, or what the accommodation number that is provided by HDSP when we do our calculations of what they are required to provide?
Through your worship to the council, would that be in relation to parking or the floor space index in terms of calculations?
Just overall.
It would be the physical number of classrooms. That's the way that the bylaw defines parking, for example.
Okay. And would we count the portable as a physical classroom?
That would be correct.
Okay. So the number of parking spaces that they be required, though we've heard compelling, hopefully, arguments that staff need to be able to park, but they will include those portables in the calculation. Okay, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that would be correct.
Okay, so my next question is, has the school board done the analysis of what the ratio of walk to bus is? I'm hearing you haven't done your boundary, but you, if you use a 3.2, the volume, I'm hearing, or at least I thought I understood, that the number of walk-tos is anticipated to be high. But what is that based on?
It would be based on or through your worship, it would be based on the number of people that are living within the 3.2 kilometers within close proximity to the school. So I would say that because that's a higher distance, because the interconnectivity of how North Oakville is laid out in terms of a street network, I think we'll have a pretty good walk to school count. With that said, however, again, the entirety of the North Oakville secondary plan is quite large. So I would say that students that are residing or having the map in front of me further east of the 6th line and further east will more than likely be transported, all depending on what that walk distance is going to be. So there'll probably be a higher number of bus students than potential eligible walkers. But again, that's to be seen with the outcome of the boundary review and exactly where North Oakville Secondary School is going to be serving.
So thank you for that. So you had mentioned earlier that you define that the drop-off, the bus drop-off, is adequate. I hate to be picky, but that word makes me very nervous. Adequate based on 1,200 and based on how many students you're busing. Seems to me that that's a really important number to get correct, given how they have to navigate in and out and the issues we seem to have with buses and drop-off.
Through your worship, just to add to that, a lot of times the way we plan our transportation is we'll provide for staggered bus times, staggered pickup times, and staggered drop-off times. So we're not having to put too many pressures on a school site when it comes to picking or dropping kids off at the facility. So that's something we can certainly manage with our transportation consortium.
Okay. My other questions around active transportation, because I think Councillor Parma said it very well, 46 bikes, access for 46 bicycle racks or whatever is not very high. When you report back, Mr. Hassan, can you just give us some insight into what is the active transportation plan around that site? Is there a thought to dedicated bike lanes? How are we seeing, how are we ensuring that we would be encouraging bicycling safely to the school?
Yeah, through Mayor Burton, I'll ensure to include a map and details regarding to that in relation to how that connects with the subject lands.
Those are my questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Haslett-Deal. Madam Clerk, it appears to me that you could call the next delegation. Oh, wait. Councillor Parma, I forgot. You're back.
That's okay. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question. is there a library planned in the new school, or is there a plan for a reciprocal agreement between the existing or perhaps future permanent library that we have at 16 Mile?
Through your worship, I don't believe there's a plan for a reciprocal agreement on the library.
And also, no library in the school either?
No, there will certainly be a library in the school.
Okay.
However, in terms of a reciprocal agreement, I don't believe we've had that discussion yet, or whether it's in the plans.
Thank you.
All right. I want to thank you folks from the school board for the way you stood up to our grueling examination, and thank you for your contributions to the meeting. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation, please?
Next delegation is Julia Sajarda from Gowling WLG and Andrew Fata from Urban Tech.
All right, Ms. Jarda, council looks, I'm going to see you in a second when they put you up, I guess. Or not. Can we hear you, Ms. Jarda?
Oh, hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay,
We look
great.
forward to
Sorry,
your
I think
information. You have the
I
floor.
had a Zoom issue. So hi everyone. My name is Julia Sharda and I'm a registered professional planner at Gowling WLG. We represent the McGowan family who owns 3056 Nayagawa Boulevard, the property to the east of the existing parish. We have reviewed the applicant's submission materials and we support the zoning bylaw amendment and the associated town-initiated official plan amendment. However, we have some concerns regarding servicing that our engineering consultant, Andrew Feta at Urban Tech, will now address. I believe he is on the line, if it's possible for him to follow my
We
comments.
can see him very well, and I imagine when he speaks, we'll hear him.
Yeah, hopefully you can all hear me. Good evening, everyone.
We hear you well.
Wonderful, thank you. So yes, as Julia mentioned, our clients are supportive of the school board and the rezoning proceeding. And as everyone likely recognizes, this is an urban core block. And what we're looking for at this time is just further coordination between the town and region and HDSB regarding future service connections. Currently, as the school board representatives mentioned, there's no current development application, but now that the zoning is changing, the property ownership and future development plans could change very rapidly. So we just want to protect for any future urban core development there and avoid disturbances to that 16-mile drive right of way. As was noted, there will be water main connections and sanitary sewer, and that will be a gravity sanitary sewer. And both the urban core block, or the future urban core block at 3056 Nayagawa, and the school block will have lift stations to bring their sanitary flows up to the gravity sewer. Just to clarify a point that Councillor Algar had raised. So we just want to make sure again that those sewers and the water main are adequately sized and for the anticipated populations for the urban core block, and that servicing stub connections are provided during the construction of the 16-mile drive extension. Given that that will be the primary access for the school block, we don't want to have to go back in there, a year or so after the school board is finished and then disturb the road to build some service connections. So we're just looking to coordinate that, or at least start the discussions to do so. And through the detailed site plan design of the school block and 16-mile drive, as that's proceeding, I'm sure some plans will come forward for 3056 Nayagawa. So we just want to make sure we're all on the same page with servicing requirements, so there's no future disruptions to that road.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I don't see any, I do have questions from a couple of councillors, Councillor Grant and Councillor Sanju.
I just want to make sure that we have the ability to accommodate the request from the McGowans about making sure that we have some way of having them use their property and enjoy the ability of having the request made from the person who's just talked.
Councillor, who's your question for? I understand your question to be, have we, the town, an ability to accommodate
I'm
this
hoping
request?
that we can at least accommodate the McGowans. They have spent several years on that property and have had no certainty. So now as we continue forward, I'd like them to at least be able to have some certainty as to how they can use their property as they go forward.
Well, thank you for the point. If you're just registering the wish, then it's noted. I don't know how to answer the question, and I don't know who you want to answer the question.
Well, I guess it goes to the person who, the person who's responding on behalf of the McGowans, and it goes to the town staff who are going to hopefully respond to what is being asked to make sure that we have some guarantee that they're not going to be ignored any further.
All right.
If I may, sorry.
Let's turn to Andrew. He hinted at the gap that exists between the fact that the board has an application and the McGowans don't have one yet. And I took him to be suggesting that they would try to catch up and coordinate. Was I correct in that, Andrew?
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship.
Councillor Grant, does that help you?
I may add that the FSR prepared by the HDSB didn't include a future population estimate for the McGowan property. So it's fair to say the lands have been accommodated for in the capacity. We just want to dot the I's and cross the T's and make sure that population is representative of the future urban core land use that will be on that block. Originally, there was a stormwater management pond shown on that block in some of the planning documents. Now that the school board is providing their own stormwater management strategy, that means on the McGowan's property, they might not need as large of a facility or one at all, which opens opportunities for maybe more density or other uses. So we just wanted to make sure that the full future population for that block will be accommodated.
And that's great, and it's fair enough. But again, the McGowans have been living on this property and hope to use it for better property in the future. It's caused them so much pain over like 10 years, further than 10 years actually. And I just want to make sure that they at least are doing better with what they have as we go forward. So that's all I'm concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sanju?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Actually, this is a question for Mr. Hassan. Mr. Hassan, could you just clarify for me, and just kind of along the same vein, but speaking specifically regarding the church, will the church's servicing also be done at the same time? Will there be joint access, parking, servicing at the same time as the school?
Through your worship, as the church are part of the subject lands, the servicing strategy will take a look at how the school board site will be serviced and any opportunities to allow for connections. Again, as Ms. Hickey had noted, we don't want to preclude the development of that site, noting that it is adjacent to it. And again, not even withstanding services, my understanding that traffic engineering staff have done extensive research and had dialogue with Paradigm staff to understand how the vehicular movement and safety aspects will be looked at from a holistic perspective, just noting the prominence of that intersection. So all those items definitely will be looked at in unison.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. If I could ask you to maybe just take away a quick note on that. I think all of council would benefit from understanding whether the church will be hooked up from a servicing perspective going forward, regardless of whether they decide to develop their property or not. I think we'd like to know that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. Just a very quick question to our friends from Gowlings. I'm just curious, are you, and you may not be at liberty to disclose this, but are you coordinating with 1013 Dundas, the owners of 1013 Dundas, and whatever it is you are working on there so that we make sure there's a cohesive plan for that particular corner?
Sorry, which address are you?
1013 Dundas. It's the actual corner,
right.
chiseled out of the McGowan's property.
So I'm not aware of any coordination at this time.
Can I suggest at some point, perhaps you want to touch base with the ownership there, just so there's a bit of thought given to coordinating efforts, because it is the literal corner of Neagawa and Dundas.
I will let my client know about your comment.
James and Jim and Diana are quite familiar with the property, so
yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
All right, Council, well done. I think we've exhausted this delegation. Madam Clerk, let me thank this delegation for their time and their information, and I will now ask you to call the next delegation.
Our last listed delegation is Alex Jurjevic from the St. Peter and Paul Serbian Orthodox Church Board.
Mr. Jurjevic, are you there?
Hopefully I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you quite well. Welcome. Council looks
evening.
forward to your information.
My camera is not working, Your Worship, so I apologize. I wanted to profusely apologize to the entire group. I arrived late due to some work duties, so hopefully I've missed a ton. I don't have a lot to add. I am a member of the church board. I would like to remind council that not only the McGowans, but we ourselves have been in a long period of waiting to see what will happen with the subject property in the intended school. I will acknowledge that everything that I have heard through the board, there have been many good faith conversations, both with the town and in particular the school board as well. So we do feel like there has been good dialogue. And again, we've had the opportunity to meet with Councillor Sandhu. I wanted to thank her for her time that she's devoted to listen to our concerns. Again, I think Mr. Faddis said it well. I think at the stage that we're at, all that we would ask is continuing coordination between the town, the school board, and the region. We've been through the road widening. We know a lot of coordination needs to happen. If you look at some of the initial concepts that have been put forward today, our property seems landlocked. And obviously that would not be a usable piece of property. We look forward to continuing to be a valued member of the community and a good neighbor to the school. And so, we would just ask for, in the same spirit of coordination, to continue and the opportunity to put ideas forward to have the best possible outcome for the community overall. And obviously ourselves as someone who intends to remain a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those kind words and good wishes. I see no questions, so thank you very much, sir. Madam Clerk, is there another delegation? Council, that ends the delegations. Have any other issues, have you any other issues to add, or have we found our way through to the end of the maze in terms of identifying the issues? May I have a motion to, well, let's turn to we'll turn to Planning Director Simeone for his report, and I'll ask for a mover for his report. And Councillor Sandhu, were you kindly about to provide that? I'll recognize you for that when we get there. Thank you very much. Mr. Simeone, perhaps you could recap your report.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council. So first item I have is, what approach will the school board take to use energy efficient material to reduce climate change impacts with respect to this proposal? Next item. Has an analysis on the adequacy of both the number of bicycle and car parking spaces been undertaken? Staff to provide a detailed review of parking issues associated with this proposal. The staff are to confirm whether or not the field will be lit. Staff to review the zoning on abutting lands and report back on any holding provisions and what's necessary to remove them. Number 6, can the school board provide a ratio of the walk to versus bus students in the final report? Staff to provide an analysis of active transportation infrastructure that will be supporting the school. Staff to confirm and consider servicing issues that may reside on abutting lands. And I've added one from a staff standpoint, staff to provide an analysis of the applicability of section 41.1 of the Planning Act. 1.1, sorry.
All right. You may have captured it all. I would just like to mention that when we were told that there would be or could be staggered bus arrivals, many members of council are aware of schools in Oakville belonging to HDSB where staggering of bus arrivals has been reported by the board as impossible to arrange. And so I would ask that staff give due consideration to what would be the result if the school board were here at this school also be unable to deliver on that suggestion. All right? And with that, the report is moved by Councillor Sanju. Is there any objection to the report? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and it's carried. Thank you very much, everybody. We now get to turn to item number 5, which is the town-initiated official plan amendment for the very same enterprise. And our planner, Brandon Hassan, is ready to give a presentation about this and why it's necessary. Mr. Hassan,
thank you,
have
Mayor.
the floor.
Yep, you're just waiting for it to pop up on the screen. Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Burton. So as previously noted, this would be the associated official plan amendment. This town-initiated official plan amendment relates to a proposed new secondary school located at 1039 Dundas Street West, which we just discussed, as identified under item 4 of tonight's agenda. The report for this item and the appendix A for it can be found under item 5 on pages 87 through 98 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to introduce the application to council and the public and to obtain any further comments for review as it relates to this application. No decision will be made tonight. And as noted on the screen, if there is anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we will connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. Next slide, please. So similar to my previous presentation, the subject lands are expanded somewhat, which encapsulates the corner property at 3056 Niagawa Boulevard. So again, the properties contain an existing church, parish hall, and service building, which will remain in place on the east side and the center of the subject lands. And again, in addition to the existing buildings, structures, and outdoor storage on the property municipally known as 3056 Niagawa Boulevard. Next slide, please. This is just, again, a recap of the conceptual site plan showing where the proposed school is on the west portion of the subject lands. Next slide, please. And again, a repeat of this slide showing the vehicular movement. However, the subject lands have been modified to encapsulate 3056 Niagawa Boulevard. So again, all of the vehicular access remains the same as previously shown. Next slide, please. So in terms of this particular application, again, this is the Oakville official plan map for the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. And as you can see in this particular map, I've highlighted the secondary school site symbol and crossed it out, noting that it's proposed to be relocated to the west of the subject lands. So again, the subject lands are designated Dundas Urban Core Area and Community Park Area, which permits secondary schools and accessory uses. The subject lands also have a secondary school site notation, which straddles 1039 Dundas Street West and 3056 Niagara Boulevard. The purpose and intent of the town-initiated amendment to the official plan is to make a technical mapping modification to permit a secondary school site on the west side of the subject lands. This would assist in the future development of the subject lands and interpretation of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan through the implementation of the official plan. The secondary school site designation, as seen on the mapping, is conceptual designation intended to recognize general potential locations for publicly funded elementary and secondary schools. Development applications are reviewed in the context of the master plan in order to evaluate consistency. Next slide, please. And again, just a map as a refresher in relation to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide, please. Frozen here. So since the writing of the staff report, public comments have been received as noted below. The zoning bylaw amendment application, which we previously discussed under item 4, and then similar items as previously noted, such as development timing, future notices, joint access, parking, servicing, again, as we previously discussed, and refinements to the zoning bylaw to regulate the lands retained by the church. Next slide, please. And then the matters to be addressed are specific to relocating the secondary school site notation as per the North Oakville East Secondary Plan to the west of the subject lands. The proposed Halton District School Board Secondary School, existing place of worship, town lands, and existing development lands at the intersection all form the subject lands in order to provide clarity on the coordinated development review and mapping modification. The typical timeline for processing and considering of an official plan amendment has been compressed to promptly address the implementation and interpretation issues that are primarily technical in nature. And next slide, please. And in closing, these are the recommendations that can be found in the staff report. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Council has a question, and it's Councillor Elgar.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Through you to staff, how soon will this be coming back to council for approval? I know we're just receiving information tonight, but how soon will this be coming back, since we're trying to get this school started to get the hole in the ground?
Yeah, through your worship, the intent is to have both items coordinated for the next Planning and Development Council meeting once all the issues and concerns have been addressed and identified, just so that they are reviewed and dealt with concurrently.
I thank you for that. So that would be in February then?
Depending on how quickly staff can address the issues and deal with the resubmission from the applicant. Again, meeting notice requirements as well. I'm not sure about February, but we can definitely report back on status updates if that is helpful.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Hassan, were there any questions or issues identified by council or the public that are going to require resubmissions from the applicant?
To Mayor Burton, in terms of, again, the conceptual site plan, there are some things that traffic and engineering staff would like to see modified. There were some questions from park staff as well as regional staff that would all encapsulate a resubmission. Thank you very much for that. Council, you can now have a clean conscience. It doesn't sound like you're going to be delaying it. So there you go. Are there any delegations on this, Madam Clerk? Council, there being no delegations, I would be happy to receive a motion for the report. Councillor Grant, you were first out of the gate. Any objection to the report? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion is carried. And thank you, Mr. Hassan.
The next item is the public meeting and recommendation report for the zoning bylaw amendment for MGO at 3369 6th line. And we have a presentation from Kate Cockburn, our planner. And if there's anyone watching the live stream of the meeting and they wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. And Council, we have one, a planner on behalf of the applicant who has a presentation in addition to ours. We can now give our attention to our planner. Ms. Cockburn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I trust that you can hear me okay.
Very well indeed.
Okay, wonderful. This evening, I have a zoning bylaw amendment application. The application has been submitted by MGO North Oakville Limited. And this proposal relates to modifications to a draft plan of subdivision, which includes changes to the arrangements of live-work units and rear lane townhouse units. And this report can be found on page 99 of tonight's agenda. Just a matter of note, this item was presented to council at a previous public meeting held on September the 8th, 2020. However, due to a technical irregularity with the notice, a new public meeting is required. And given that council has provided their concerns respecting the application at that previous public meeting, and which staff have evaluated for tonight's agenda item, staff believe it's appropriate to consider tonight's item as a combined public meeting and recommendation report to council on the proposed development. Staff have not received any written submissions from the previous public meeting, nor have we received any to date. And there were no members of the public present at the last public meeting as well. Slide, please. Thank you. The subject land is located on the east side of 6th line, north of Carnegie Drive. The subject lands are within an approved draft plan of subdivision, which was approved by the former Ontario Municipal Board in 2017. Phase 1 of the subdivision, noted in red, was approved, or was registered rather, in 2019. And Phase 2, the area in black, adjacent to 6th line, remains draft approved. The applicant has also submitted a revision for the draft approved plan, and this is to revise portions of the plan to provide for a density of 33 units per hectare. The existing plan has 33 units per hectare, and the effect of the proposed modifications will see a resultant increase to 38 units per hectare. A slide, please. The proposed zoning application is to facilitate changes to the draft approved plan of subdivision, which will have an effect of modifying the existing zoning regulations to address the number of live-work units at the intersection of Marvin Avenue and 6th line. This is within the activity node, and as well as address the built form of those uses. The proposed rezoning will also modify the lot dimensions for the townhouse units with rear lane access to accommodate an additional variety of housing forms within the subdivision. This phase of the subdivision will see a mixture of detached and townhouse dwellings, and will have both street access and laneway access. Additionally, a portion of the residential reserve lands along the future Settlers Road East to the north of the subdivision will be rezoned to coordinate with a future development to the north by the same developer. Slide, please. As a way of background again, a public meeting was held on September 5th, 2020, and no members of the public were present and no written correspondence was submitted. To date, no public comments have been received. Staff have presented various matters for consideration, which included consistency and conformity with the provincial plans, design and functionality of the live-work units located at the activity node, the coordination of residential reserve blocks with the adjacent plans of subdivision and zoning, and the layout and laneway alterations within the subdivision. These matters have been addressed to staff satisfaction, and details have been provided in the report. And council raised the following additional matters, which have now been addressed in detail in the staff report, this evening. These items included a detailed parking analysis and plan, which is to be provided in the recommendation report. Staff were to provide a market justification for the proposed changes, and information on how notice was sent out to potential purchasers is also provided in the recommendation report. Slide, please. To dive deep a little more into each of these items, I've presented some information with respect to parking. The applicant had provided a detailed parking analysis with the additional parking spaces that could be accommodated on the street. It is noted that future commercial uses are not dependent on street parking, but spaces will be available to enhance the usability of these uses. Through the revisions proposed by the applicant, additional on-street parking will be available on Millicent Avenue, which were not contemplated in the original approval by the Ontario Municipal Board. The additional parking requirements of this, the minimum parking requirements of the zoning bylaw are met with the additional on-street parking opportunity. Further, the proposed upgrades to 6th line will also present opportunities for on-street parking that were not previously contemplated. However, it is not clear at this stage how much parking will be accommodated on 6th line until that plan further develops. Lastly, staff will continue to review parking as well as pedestrian connections to 6th line through the revision of the draft plan process. Slide, please. There was a request for a market justification with respect to the modification of live-work units. The applicant has proposed alternatives to the initially contemplated 20 live-work units to provide a more desirable, larger commercial space and encourage opportunities for a broader range of commercial uses. In combination with their proposed development on the west side of 6th line, the applicant states that residents on both sides of 6th line will be able to safely access commercial amenities in the activity node. The applicant is proposing a combined commercial area between both the east and west sides of 6th line of 5,000 square feet or 464.5 square meters. With the opportunity for additional commercial uses with the optional flex space in the remaining townhouse units can be used as office space. The existing zoning permissions would support the flex space alternative. With this approach, it is consistent with the North Oakville East Secondary Plan policies and promotes an active activity node for North Oakville. Slide, please. Lastly, with respect to notice, pardon me, I'm having technical difficulties, sorry. With respect to notice, irregularity in the notice was discovered prior to proceeding with a recommendation report in November. As a result, new notice was required as it related to the public meeting held in September. Staff can confirm that notice respecting this application was issued in accordance with the Planning Act, which prescribes that notice of a zoning bylaw amendment application be provided to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands. The individual lots and blocks within the draft plan are not formally created or conveyed until the subdivision is registered. In cases where development has proceeded but lands have not yet been sold, the owner or developer would receive that notice. If lots have been sold, notice will be given to the mailing address the town has on file associated with the tax record. And it is common for the mailing address to be different than the physical address that the new owners have not yet occupied their property. The applicant has informed staff that notice was provided in accordance with the Planning Act requirements, and no additional notice had been issued. Notice had also been provided by posting a sign on the property, and information on the proposal is available on the town's website. Slide, please. The zoning bylaw and proposed modifications propose to maintain the existing category of the NC Special Provision 40. This is Neighborhood Center Special Provision 40. But it will modify certain provisions to facilitate the proposed modifications to the draft plan. The existing zoning bylaw provides that live-work units must be accommodated within the vicinity of Marvin Avenue and 6th line. The proposal will not impact the location of the live-work units, but modify how they're accommodated within a building. Further, to address the change in the built form of the units, the parking conditions have also been modified. Minimum parking requirements are not impacted. The application would also result in a change from the special provision NC 41 to special provision NC 40. This is to created through the settlement to permit small lot detached dwelling units within the NC designation. Since the passing of official plan amendment number 321, small lot singles are no longer permitted within that designation. As these lands will be merged with abutting lands to the north owned by the developer, the future zoning must conform with the current policies. And as such, the NC Special Provision 41 would not conform and therefore could not be utilized for the lands to the north. It is on this basis that the lands are proposed to be rezoned to better coordinate with lands to the north when they are developed. Slide, please. In conclusion, staff put forward the following recommendation for Council's consideration. The zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by MGO North Oakville Limited be approved on the basis that the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms and does not conflict with the applicable provincial plans, conforms with the Halton Region official plan, the North Oakville East secondary plan, and has regards for matters of provincial interest and represents good planning for the reasons outlined in the report dated January 6, 2021. That bylaw 2020-004, an amendment to zoning bylaw 2009-189 be passed, and that council's decision that notice of council's decision reflect council has fully considered all written and oral submissions related to this matter, and those comments have been appropriately addressed. And that in accordance with section 3417, the Planning Act, no further notice is deemed necessary. I am available for any additional questions council may have, and that concludes my presentation. Slide.
Thank you very much for catching us up on that. Let me see if council has questions. Councillor Palmer.
Sorry, I have my heater blaring. Okay, so thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation and for coming back with the information that we requested at the last public meeting. I do have a quick question, and it's just a point of clarification for the modified dimensions. In the report, staff speaks to recommending this and being okay with it, essentially to provide an additional variety of different purchasing options for residents. My question is around the number of units that have been modified. Do we know specifically, is it just the live-work units or that are now going to be townhouses? Is it just that area that's been modified, or is it within the subdivision?
For you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, there are modifications throughout the plan of subdivision, and that process is delegated through to the director for approval. The material or portions of the subdivisions that have been altered that required the rezoning applications are specific to the townhouse units and the live-work units that are around Marvin Avenue. And it's not to reduce the number of live-work units, it was to modify how those live-work units can be accommodated in the overall design and construction of those units.
Okay, and so when we talk about providing additional variety, would this then be based on how many of the units they sell?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I can't speak for the nature of how they will be selling or what they'll be able to sell, and I know the applicant is on the line to answer that question specifically. The nature, these particular units that are being impacted by the modification with the draft plan of subdivision relate to how they were able to accommodate new on-street parking opportunities on Millicent Avenue. And that was to allow for the detached dwellings on Millicent Avenue to have laneway access. So their garages will be in the rear. And by doing so, that reduced the depth of the townhouse units that both are affected and not affected by the plan of subdivision, or rather the live-work units. That's reduced their depth as well to provide for, from the applicant's perspective, a more affordable or a different option within the context of that subdivision.
Yes, thank you. You've answered my question, but like you just finished off by saying it's for the applicant to provide a different variety to offer to their purchasers. And so that's where my question, and perhaps applicant can answer it, is do we have a set amount of these lots that have been reduced from, I believe it was 11 meters to 9 meters, and I calculated it to feet, so I wouldn't even say it, but I'm trying to understand if we have a set amount or if it's going to be based on what they put on the market, what they're able to sell on the market. So thank you for providing your information, and I'll wait for their presentation as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sanju is next, but let me just ask you, would you like to hear from the presentation from the delegation on behalf of the applicant before you can? All right. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegation?
Catherine McEwen is speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Ms. McEwen, Council looks forward to your information, and your slides are ready to go. And we see you very well.
Good evening. My name is Catherine McEwen from Corsiac Urban Planning. I'm here on behalf of Argo Developments. Argo is quite excited about the proposed revisions to phase 2, and they've prepared a short video that I think we'd like to start with that highlights some of the key elements of the proposed plan, and it gives an idea how the plan, including the lip works and the laneways, will look and feel, and it also gives an idea of what the relationship with the surrounding area would look like. So just wondering if we could cue that video. Okay, so that was the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If we can go to the PowerPoint presentation, first page.
Is everybody muted? I'd just ask, because we're getting terrible feedback, which seems to be maybe dying off. No, it's coming back. Ms. McEwen, go ahead.
Okay, so as Kate had outlined in her presentation, since the time of original approvals, Argo and their team of architects have created some unique units that require revisions to the draft plan and the zoning. Next slide. And as mentioned, the relocation of the activity node will provide greater connection and improve the marketability and accessibility to the commercial units, as Marvin Avenue is better connected to the surrounding neighborhoods than Carnegie Drive. So this will provide approximately 5,000 square feet of viable commercial space, including the 4 corner live-work units at Marvin and 6th, as well as the proposed mixed-use building on the west side of 6th Line. Next slide, please. The market assessment that was prepared by Urban Metrics has confirmed that the proposed larger commercial spaces are preferable to the currently approved smaller units, and the focus on the intersection rather than the extended street will improve the viability of these units. These units have the commercial space on the ground floor and 2 residential units above. The increased retail space allow for a greater street presence, and they can accommodate a greater mix of uses. Next slide, please. So we did hear your comments at the public meeting regarding the number of live works. So Argo and their team created what we're calling a flex unit. So when offered for sale, the purchaser can decide on a floor plan that can provide for commercial space on the ground floor, and alternatively, you can have what we're calling a generation suite, which could be used to provide an independent space for an older child, another family member, even possibly rent it out. And there's 4 parking spaces associated with these units that allow for that flexibility. Next slide, please. And as requested at the public meeting, we prepared a parking plan for both the approved draft plan and the revised draft plan. The original draft plan had 170 units and provided, I believe, a total of 729 parking spaces, including 96 on street. And the revised plan has 196 units and provides 858 parking spaces, including 126 on street. So definitely the parking opportunities have been improved, especially along Millicent Avenue. Next slide. We're excited about the proposed revisions to the plan to allow for a greater mix of housing types and allow for a greater number of potential commercial uses in these spaces. That concludes my presentation. If anyone has any questions of me, also Kevin Singh and Scott Bland from Argo are also available for any questions, should you have any.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I appreciate the clarity you provided on the 17% increase in on-street parking or total parking. We have Councillor Sanju and Councillor Elgar. Councillor Sanju?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I only have one question. It actually might be a question for staff. I note on page 119 of our book, it's page 21 of the report. There's a comment about the urbanization of 6th Line moving forward. And I know that in the video that we just saw from Argo, there's an indication that there's going to be lay-by parking. Do we have any information about when that lay-by will be approved, if it's been approved, when it will happen, and what the timeline looks like on 6th Line?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I can answer some of those questions now, and others I think the appropriate staff would need to get back to you. The urbanization of 6th Line is well underway in terms of the design exercises. It is expected to accommodate on-street parking. The question we have at this particular point in time through our engineering construction group is where and how many on-street parking spaces can be accommodated. And this is to coordinate with the infrastructure that needs to exist within the 6th Line urbanization, primarily with the location of hydro poles, where other facilities might be located, street planting, and to provide for canopy coverage along our 6th Line. So there are a number of those items at this particular point in time that we've been unable to firm up what the full urbanization plan will look like, but it is well underway. And I can leave that with other appropriate staff to get back to you on, more importantly, the timing question you had in terms of when it can be expected to be delivered and what that will look like.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn. I think my concern is general, and I think that it might be a concern that many of the other councillors have. So we've seen this already happen on Niagawa, just across the street from 60 Mile Sports Complex. Those townhomes there were supposed to have a lay-by on Niagawa, and the region declined that option in the past. And this is well before I think this council sat. So I think that our concern generally, and I think that Councillor Parmar's and my concern generally is that we want to ensure that the lay-by parking that we've taken into account and ARCO's taken into account is something that we can rely on in the future. We don't want the same detrimental effects that we're seeing on Niagawa also happen on 6th Line. We have severe issues with people even being able to receive packages along that stretch of the road. And I don't want something that ARCO's clearly worked very, very hard on to basically go to waste for the folks that are going to be living along that part of 6th Line. So any type of information that you require from council, I'm sure everybody here would be happy to move this along as much as we could to make sure that we can get that urbanization underway, and so that we can get that parking information underway for the lay-bys, so that we can have a developing and regularly used community. We're already short on space in Ward 7, and I don't want to create a situation where we're exacerbating issues that we already have.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. I do know that the applicant, Argo, is very well invested and have been involved in a lot of the discussions for the urbanization of 6th Line. Jill Stephen is also available, and perhaps I can defer to her at this time to give you answer some of those questions at the outset, and anything that she might be able to get back to you on as well. So I don't know if Jill would be able to jump in.
Through you, Mayor Burton, Kate has done an excellent job giving an overview of the 6th Line project. We are at approximately the 60% design stage with what we're calling phase 2 of 6th Line. So that's North Park Northerly. The developers have been very involved in our design process as well, so that we can ensure that we are working collaboratively together to provide for the lay-by parking and make sure that everyone is informed about what those lay-bys will look like and where they will be located. So right now we are working on delivering phase 1, which is North Park Southerly to Dundas. And the intention is that we would move to construction of phase 2, so North Park Northerly, in 2022 would be the start of construction.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen. I think can someone give me a little bit of an indication from a planning perspective as to when these townhomes are supposed to be in place?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I think that's a question that's best directed to the applicant based on their timeline. Again, staff still do have a revision to address with respect to the draft plan, which is a process that will happen subsequent to any decision this evening on this application. And that does take a little bit of time in order for the applicant to continue to fulfill their draft plan conditions and then register their subdivision to move ahead. So I can turn it perhaps to Catherine or Kevin if they have any comments on the timing, what their anticipated timing would be for construction.
Obviously dependent on approvals, but with the anticipated 2022, we're already in 2021. By the time we get approved, registered, it should sync together. That's the intent.
Thank you for that. And I think I just have one more question for Director Stephen. As far as the hydro poles are concerned in that area, do we know if this is all going to be above ground or if they're going to be buried and below ground at any point along the way?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the hydro poles will be above ground in this along 6th line. So we are working with hydro and through the design to ensure that we are locating everything and understanding the interdependencies between the above ground and below ground infrastructure in relation to the lay-by locations as well.
So that's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Councillor Sanju. Councillor Elgar, you're up.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Just a quick question. After watching the video, what percentage of this application is hard surface versus having a little bit of grass? Like, I'm just, what's the overall percentage there for a hardened surface? And also, what's the projected tree canopy of this application?
So I don't have the actual percentages on hand. I can certainly get those to you, but the tree canopy coverage was all dealt with and will be continued to be dealt with through the conditions of draft approval, the requirements there.
Yeah, just the video, I think, whoops. The video seemed to show very little green space and not very many trees also. It was a bit shocking. So anyhow, that was my only question, is to find out going forward when we're doing something, we maybe get a little more green space in places. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Councillor Adams.
Just had a quick question. I'm not sure whether staff should answer this one or if the applicant can provide the information. I'm trying to understand what the total amount of commercial space that was originally envisioned with the live work units would have been versus the revised larger unit format in the activity note in the entire in all the 4 quadrants.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I'm going to defer that to Catherine. I believe she has those numbers on hand. In short, there is a reduction from what had originally been contemplated, but as highlighted in the staff report, the importance of providing the modifications that the applicant has proposed is to create a wider variety of opportunities by providing larger units rather than having a multitude of smaller units that would be limited to very particular uses or repetitive uses within that area. So I'll turn it to Catherine for now.
Sure. So compared to the original submission, dependent on whether the purchaser opts for the commercial space or the generation suite, it could be that there's more space provided, but that's dependent on the purchaser. An example, lands to the east on Burnhamthorpe, there was a kind of a flex live work block directly on Burnhamthorpe, and all of the purchasers opted for the commercial space. So it's just dependent on the purchasers. It could be more than originally intended, or depending if they want to go with the generation suites, a few of them, it will be slightly lower. But then there's also the commercial space on the west side of 6th line.
And thanks. I appreciate that information. That's very useful. The last question I had for you on the same topic was, can you give an indication to us what 500 square feet versus 1,000 square feet, it looks like in a unit in terms of the kinds of things that we've got around Oakville. We do have some live work units that are over on Post Ridge. I wondered, do you know what the size of those units might be? And could you tell us, for example, what, say, an average unit size would be within a normal shopping plaza or a convenience plaza, or say at Oakville Place?
I don't have the numbers for the higher uses such as at Oakville Place or in a shopping plaza offhand. In terms of the live work units, the smaller ones I believe range from about 46 square meters for, you know, a smaller typical one that has that we're kind of used to. These ones at the corners are approximately 92 square meters.
Great, I appreciate all that information. Thanks very much.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank the delegations for their information, and I'll look for a motion. Councillor Chisholm moves the staff recommendation. Councillor Palmer, did you want to move it? No, okay. I'll ask if there's any objection to the motion. Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We now have, coming into the back stretch of this meeting, we have the notice of intention to demolish the cultural heritage landscape heritage designation and the amendment of Lakeshore Road East bylaw and the advisory committee minutes. I need to ask you if you would like a 5-minute stretch break before we go on with those, or are you, how much time do you need for the rest of the meeting? Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Worship. I dare say my colleagues have seen the extremely extensive background on the item for 110 Chisholm Street. I don't think we need a presentation for that. I'll defer to my Ward 3 colleagues regarding Gairloch and the other, which is situated in their ward, but I'd be more than happy to move 110 Chisholm and just reassure council that, as they saw from the lengthy report, we don't take these things lightly, and there was considerable discussion at Heritage Oakville about the fact that while this property might have been saved in a district, we don't have a district plan, and it doesn't qualify for Part 4. So I just share that.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. The item number 7 is properly moved by Councillor Duddick. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. Item 7 carries. Council, what is your wish with regard to item 8? Are we going to move as Councillor Duddick has modeled, or are we going to have an extensive discussion? We're going to have a break if we're going to have a discussion. I'm looking to Ward 3. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Duddick said, the Gairloch Gardens was discussed at length at the Heritage Advisory Committee as well. If we could just have clarification. It talks about a separate staff report being forwarded to this meeting this evening. As long as it's the same as what was covered at the Heritage Advisory Committee, I'd be happy to move that concerning the little jewel from Oakville, as Gairloch.
Can the director provide an answer to Councillor Giddings?
I would defer to Sue Shepard, Your Worship.
Through you, Your Worship, yes, Councillor Giddings, that is the report. There is no other.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Shepard. Councillor Giddings, you are on mute, so we did not get to hear you.
Well, I'd be happy to move that then, with thanks to the staff for their exhaustive work on the report, and very thankful for where we ended up with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Giddings has duly moved item number 8. I saw Councillor Grant's hand. Councillor Grant, are you, you have the floor.
I am seconding the motion made by Councillor Giddings.
Oh, well, the good news is we're in committee of the whole and we don't need a seconder, but thank you very much for, no, it's good of you to volunteer. Madam Clerk, I will ask if there's any objection to the motion by Councillor Giddings. Madam Clerk, there is no objection. The motion carries. That brings us to item number 9, the amendment of bylaw 2013-93 with regard to 474 Lakeshore Road East. Susan Shepard, our heritage planner, is available to answer any questions. If we're having questions and discussion, we're having a break on behalf of the chair. So what is your pleasure on this item, Council? Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is pretty straightforward, talking about the relationship of 86 Park, 88 Park, 474 Lakeshore, and the new build at 480 Lakeshore. I'd be happy to move it if none of my colleagues have any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. The item is duly moved by Councillor Giddings. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. Council, may I ask your attention to the advisory committee minutes? We need a motion dealing with item number 1 in that report for the approval of the heritage permit application. And actually that's all.
That's all.
Do we have a motion there? Councillor Giddings, is that you moving it?
It is, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The item is duly moved by Councillor Giddings. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. We need a mover that we rise and report. Councillor Knoll, thank you. You were the quickest, you have the quickest reflexes at this point in the evening. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the motion carries. And I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1 and 2, public hearing items 3, 4, 5, and 6, discussion items 7, 8, and 9, and advisory committee minutes, items 10, as noted by the clerk. Is there a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Elgar and Councillor Longo, the quickest reflexes on this one. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there is no objection. The report is adopted. Council, is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Madam Clerk, I see none. A mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws is in order. Councillor Lischina and Councillor O'Meara. This is for the bylaws as listed in the agenda. Any objection to the bylaws? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The bylaws are adopted. Council, thank you very much for your time and attention in this meeting and the many decisions that we've made here. It has been terrific working with you, and having completed the scheduled work for this meeting, it is now over. Good night.